I am Mayor Al Adam, Mayor of the City of Thousand Oaks. Hi, saw you last night. Good crowd tonight. Appreciate all being here. Got a big job ahead of us. We have to update our general plan, which was written in 1970. That's 50 years ago, so I think we're about ready for a little update. Don't you agree? Yeah, there you go. There you go. I'll tell you, though, the Founding Fathers got a lot right in this city. I think you'd all agree. We have a beautiful city. We have 60 parks. Doug knows about that. Doug Nichols, Conejo-Reckon Park. 60 parks. We have 15,000 acres of open space. We have a safe community, a community where you can raise your kids and own a home. So we're in gratitude to the Founding Fathers. But a lot's changed since 1970, needless to say. Back in 1970, the population of Thousand Oaks was about 50,000 people. Right now, we're 130,000. And even 10 years before that, the population was only 10,000, but when they brought the 101 freeway through, we exploded in growth in the 1960s, so by 1970 we had 50,000 people. The median age back in 1970, are you ready for this? 22. 22 years old. We were a young city with families and young kids. Now the median age is twice that, 44. So we are an aging community. In fact, we're about 25% seniors now. The median income back then, $15,000 a year, which is actually more than I make as mayor. But at any rate, we are a lot higher than that now, thanks to great companies like Amgen and Sage and Skyworks, and that have been here in Thousand Oaks and boosted that median income. You know, the Founding Fathers, like I said, they got a lot right, but there were some things they didn't quite predict accurately. For example, did you know there was supposed to be an airport in the Tierra Rajada Valley? A big, major airport. And the Conejo Creek Freeway was going to connect it to us, which was actually Route 23, which is now. So that didn't quite work out. There was also supposed to be in this very spot where Jungle Land was, they predicted it would be a motel area, which I think we did a little bit better than motels, so I'm proud to see that we built our beautiful Civic Arts Plaza. One thing that I did find interesting, the Arts Council back in 1970 did a poll because they wanted to see what people wanted in the community as far as amenities, and the people said, well, we want auditoriums, we want meeting rooms, and we want, are you ready? Coffee lounges. Coffee lounges. And this was 50 years ago, right? So that was pretty forward thinking because, as you all know, we have quite a few quote-unquote coffee lounges here in Thousand Oaks, namely Starbucks on every other corner. So if we had only known, right? So a lot has changed, and now's the time to update our general plan. Now's the time to set the blueprint for the next 20 to 25 years, and we're so happy that you're here to help us do that. And we have a speaker here tonight that's also going to help us. He is an urban economist. He is a planner. He is an author. And he has come up with a science, I guess you'd call it a science, called geoaccounting, which I hope he talks about tonight. And it's really, as I understand it, the best way to use your land in your city to get the most community benefit from it. And we don't have a lot of land left, and so we need to make sure we get the best benefit we can for it. So let me bring up our speaker tonight, Joe Minicozzi. Where are you, Joe? Right behind me. There he is. Joe Minicozzi, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for taking your night out to nerd out on some taxation. I'll try to keep it fun, and also try to put it in context of how you can learn from this in the process as you go forward with your comp plan, and how to see it on a day-to-day basis. When I talk about cities, the best metaphor that I can give you, I'm going to give you a lot of data and a lot of slides, but I want you to think of your city as a form of DNA. Your city is a place in time. It will grow or it will die, much in the way that we all do. So we have trajectories as humans, and cities are just places of humans. So this is how I started life when I was 3 months old and I had hair, and this is my trajectory, right? So I'll be Papa whether I like it or not. You can see from my name or how much I wave my hands that I'm Italian. I can't change that. More importantly, I look at these two. So this is my mom and my dad, again, when I had hair. I'm genetically Italian, and we also suffer from a genetic predisposition to heart disease. Every Minicozzi male has had that problem. So I know that it's in me. It's not a big surprise. But I have to work with that, right? I have to eat right, I have to exercise, I have to do all of that stuff in order to compensate for my genetic qualities. So what's the genetic DNA of Thousand Oaks, and what is your grandfather or grandmother? What do you want to be when you grow up, and are you looking at those models to see the good things, the healthy tissue, but also the heart attacks? So be aware of that. As you talk about the comp plan, look for other models. So that's where I'll start. That's my lesson. But now let's talk about data. So I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. Just shout out, who's been to Asheville? Anyone? Just a couple people? Cool. Asheville's a funky little town. It's northeast of Atlanta, about 3 hours. Blue Ridge Mountains, bluegrass music. We're 90,000 people, so we're smaller than you all are, but we have 40 breweries, 40. We drink a lot. Like any quirky little mountain town, we have men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. It's your typical little place. Asheville didn't start this way. This is a shot of Asheville back in the 1800s. This is a shot when we were growing. This is when we were a baby. 15, 20 years after this picture was taken, this is the exact same location. We like to say the 3 T's made Asheville: the trains, tourism, and tuberculosis. Asheville was a summertime escape for a lot of industrialized towns. And we really rapidly changed, but we also died. Like any American city, we hollowed out our downtown and essentially walked away from it. These are shots of downtown Asheville from not too long ago, just boarded up buildings that we just walked away from. This is a 1996 Chevy Celebrity right there. That's not too long ago. That's in this generation. How is it we failed this way? And like any Greek choir, those children in our community that went through the debt in the depression of our community, they gave up on downtown. They said, that's not who we are. We're not urban people. We're rural mountain town people. We escaped the cities, and we're up here living in the mountains. That's our attitude. So we had all these empty buildings that we refused to do anything with. I worked for this guy's company. This is Julian Price. Julian inherited a lot of money, and he created a for-profit real estate development company. So we were a developer, but we was also a revolving fund to help businesses. So we'd fix buildings up and put housing up there, but we'd also seed businesses. So we'd start restaurants, a nightclub. It was about getting activity going for those folks that wanted to be downtown. It wasn't about solving all of the city's issues. It was about making a place downtown that would work. This is one of our buildings before and after. It's a real rocket science. It was just hanging out back there. There it is. And it's an old hotel that we basically turned into apartments. We worked with Emeka, who had a bookstore down the street, and moved her in here. We have a restaurant in the basement. This is about building place in your community and about adding value back to your community. But we found is that our community wasn't talking about the data. Why does it matter? What's the city about? We were talking about what we felt. We were talking about cities as almost like a religion without seeing the evidence of what's right there in front of us. And our job was to bring that forward. So if you want to think about buildings, or an easy way to think about them, now you all are in Ventura County, you're an agricultural community. You understand farms, right? We understand that farmers have to operate in an economic model. They have crop yield per acre, water per acre. All that stuff is economics before they grow their strawberries, right? What works in the marketplace is what's going to be farmed. So if we talk the same way about buildings, this is a crop. So the city actually did a streetscape project. Our city led by doing the urban infrastructure that we would then follow through on. So thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. Some people literally said that we were subsidized because the city paid for that. So it's like, okay, fair enough, I got it. We didn't pay for it. Even though the entire world can walk on that, we put in retail, office, and residential. So this went from $300,000 of value to $11 million. So the taxes y'all get, right, because you're paying taxes on top of that, the taxes you get just grew by 3,500%. Do you have a savings account that grows by 3,500%? Wouldn't you like that? How about your 401k plan? Now, this is about us building wealth in our community. This is what you get. So go out and buy 3,500% more bike racks. We don't care. How do we make wealth for our community so we can afford to buy better stuff? How do we grow together? So people see this and they're like, well, Joe, that's fine. That's $11 million. I've got this Walmart over here at $20 million. Fair enough. That's double the value. But what we're not talking about is it took 34 acres of my farm, my community, to make that happen. This building's sitting on 0.2 acres, right? So that's an apples to oranges conversation. Rather than look at it that way, let's look at the apples to apples. What do we pay in taxes per acre versus them? Who would have thought that our building is 100 times more tax productive than a Walmart? That's the value, right? And California, y'all care about retail taxes. You say, well, Joe, that's fine. That's property taxes. We care about the retail taxes. Okay, fair enough. We're paying double the retail taxes per acre. We've got residents per acre, 90 units of residential per acre. Like, what would you all do if I showed up in town and presented a 90-unit an acre building in your city? Like, what train would you run me out of town on? But is that evil? You know, it's an old JCPenney's department store building that's been producing wealth in my community for 100 years. And it's cost effective. The commute pattern is just basically an elevator. Now there's also jobs. We've got more jobs in our building. So that's it, that's the data, right? Apples to apples, which one is better for your community? Let's have that conversation and make that choice. Let me make it easier for you people in California. If you could grow something in California, what would you grow? Cash crop, right? It's a joke. This joke works in a lot of states these days. But anyway, it's understanding the numbers and understanding the potency and making a conscious choice that adds value to your community so that you can afford the things that you want to buy. I want to make sure that don't see this as all that complex. This is a 5th grade math problem. We're just dividing the land into the valuation to get an apples to apples understanding. And we already do this with cars, right? Could you imagine if I was talking about cars and we're out in the lobby and I'm like, hey, I got a Ford F-150. It gets 650 miles per tank. It's the best thing ever, right? You'd laugh at me. You'd be like, Joe, come on now. They all have different tanks. We judge vehicles' efficiency by the gallon, not the tank size, right? So we say miles per gallon, the number's changed, and we should all be driving BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. That little thing is more efficient than a Prius. That's a fact. That's data. It's also more dangerous. If you have a head-on on this thing, you're like stuck. That's a little door right there. It's a cute little thing. But anyway, we understand efficiency. So just bring it into the conversation about your taxes and how you run your city. So when I started doing this stuff in 2009, I actually went to a planning conference, a Smart Growth conference in Seattle, and I stood in front of the audience, and these are all people that are into smart growth and environmentally sensitive cities and how to make the best city ever, and we're talking about greenways and all this stuff, and I stood before the audience and I read this quote to them from Mark Twain: "A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read." And I stood in front of the room, I had my hand in the air, a bunch of professionals in there, and I said, who in this room understands how your tax assessment policies work and all of the tax legislation that affects your property valuation? Anybody? And as I stood there with being the only person with my hand in the air, my heart collapsed. I'm like, how is it that we don't understand this stuff? How do we not understand how our cities work at an economic level? And really, we're just functionally illiterate about it. It's not that we can't read, it's that we choose not to read. We choose not to understand that stuff. And that's our choice at a civic level. Why are we not doing that? So, okay, well, why does tax policy matter? Well, I'll explain it. So here's the value of our downtown. So as a portfolio, our downtown was worth $100 million. So we're a $15 million investor into that portfolio. So just by fixing those buildings that were laying around, you saw the pictures of them, this is the value of our downtown. We didn't get a new building until 2008. So that there was a wealth that was just sitting there untapped. All of that wealth was sitting there. Now, to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, these are some actual campaign ads from Chris Peterson. And I love Chris. Here he is. And here he is complaining about parking garages, streetscape projects, $26 million, downtown development for bureaucrats instead of water, sewer, streets for our citizens. I get it. $26 million is a lot of money. I don't have $26 million bucks. But let's do some math here. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset and it grows to $500 million, is investing 26 and yielding $430 million, is that a good return on investment? Yes. Yeah. Why do we listen to Chris? You know, you're not going to stop Chris. Chris has a website now with Fire and Brimstone. I like that he misspelled charlatans. This is our city manager. This is the mayor. I asked the mayor, I said, is that a liquor drink? She goes, it should be. You know, as people are entitled to their opinions, they're not entitled to a fact. There are facts and data out there that we need to use, and we need to start talking at that civic level rather about our feelings and emotions about what we want. Now, I'm cool. I'm trained as a designer. I'm all right about getting some well-designed places, but we need to start with what's the economic system that's undermining that. And really what I've found is that we're essentially functionally illiterate about our civics. This is a kid's book that I found in a garage sale, and it's the City, Town, and Country Teacher's Guide, right? So when you open it up, there it is, 1959, third grade textbook. So in kindergarten, you learn about your house, first grade the school, second grade the neighborhood, third grade you learn about regional planning. Did y'all do that? Y'all remember this book? In the teacher's guide, it says to you all, the teachers, to deal with these third graders. While patterns vary from state to state, counties are responsible for library, health, welfare, etc. In studying the functions performed by your county, you will no doubt find there's a duplication of services and overlapping of jurisdictions and a lack of coordination between the county and the municipalities within it. Y'all have that problem? You know, y'all are all county taxpayers. I'm a county taxpayer. My county actually fights against the city, and we're just like, yeah, we're all in the same bucket together, guys. You know, this is what we have to, we're functionally literate about this stuff. Here's the lesson plan. It's painfully white. It's the 1950s. It's also misogynistic. The girls are shoved out in the hallway for some reason. But you read about a new factory that gets built, and there's even more kids that go to school, right? So in blue, this is what you ask your third graders. Give 4 good reasons for building a new school. And your third graders talk about what? Equity. Everybody should have a desk, right? Maybe get another teacher, split the class in half. That's called infrastructure. I got it. On the right, you read about Mr. Canfield. He didn't want a new school. He says our taxes are too high now. If we build a new school, we'll need more teachers and everything else, and we'll have to pay higher taxes. So you ask your third graders, why are some people against paying higher taxes? What I find is that we're really good with having one side of the conversation or the other, but we don't talk about both sides. Both sides are legitimate. These needs are necessary, but at the end of the day, you have to pay for them. Buying a park, holding a park, there's a cost to that. And as long as you're writing that down and penciling it out, that's great. But make sure that these needs are being fulfilled and you're investing in a healthy community that you can afford that stuff. So my favorite part about the kids' book is this. Remember, too, that many children, whether urban and rural and regardless of region, are tragically limited in their knowledge of the world, and their world's largely the space in which they live and operate. We're all tragically limited. You know, it's like, I don't have a parking space. I need, the mayor, you need to make me a parking space. Like, really? We have to, like, change the whole world because you don't have easy parking. Oh, I'm sorry. It's this tragic limitation about understanding how this all works and how it's all tied together is what we're missing. That the city, in essence, is a finite boundary of land that's all you have is a farm. My state made it illegal for my city to change its boundary until December 26, 2026. So if you ever want to have some fun, try out North Carolina. We're awesome. So that boundary is all we have. You all have state-required control areas as well. Cities that are closer together, it's other cities that become that boundary. So that's all the land that you have. So if you think of it as a farm, you're going to see a different model. You also have to think about it as a corporation. So if you look up the word incorporate, it says to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So we're just a $15 million real estate developer. We're sitting in a much larger corporation called the City of Asheville, right? We're all in it together. It's a social corporation. It's not just your city, it's your counties incorporated, your states incorporated, and our country's incorporated. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. And I'm such a nerd, I looked it up. This is the U.S. code that lists us as a federal corporation. It doesn't say we're a capitalistic corporation. We are a social corporation that all has to work together. So there's a cash flow of how this all operates, right? Is this all too depressing? You guys with me here? So my city at $13 billion is 6 times the value of Ted Turner. So does Ted Turner wake up every day and make all of his decisions off who's ranting on Facebook? Of course not. He's looking at data and stats on how his shows are going. He's going to take that feedback from Facebook, but it's not going to drive the decisions of the corporation. And at the end of the day, he has to pay, TV talent. He has to own space. There's all of this stuff that's a cash flow. So we've done this all across the country, lots of different cities, different sizes, and it's real simple. For every dollar of taxes somebody out in the county, single family, is paying to the county, their brother and sister in the same county that's in the city is paying about 5 times that to the same county. Here's the Walmart, here's the mall, that's a 2-story building. That's a 3-story building. This is a 6-story building. So we're not talking skyscrapers. And what's crazy is look at how it jumps up exponentially in here. So we're not saying you have to have skyscrapers everywhere, but at least understand the value effect of just getting a 2nd or a 3rd story and the potency return that you get for that. Conversely, the opposite is true. The less I build, the more real estate I consume in your environment, the less taxes I pay. It's that simple. So is that the incentives that you want to have out there? This could be in Driggs, Idaho, Durham, North Carolina, or Dallas. As soon as you start stacking the stories, you see it. Now, some of y'all might be thinking, Joe, what's your problem? Why do you hate Walmart? Why are you always picking on Walmart? I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers Conference. Is there an assessor in the room? Does anybody know any assessors? Could you imagine hanging out with like 3,000 assessors? It makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man. It's the squarest thing ever. But they're awesome people, don't get me wrong, but they're a very highly trained bureaucrat. But this guy got up and spoke about Walmart. 8:30 in the morning, he did this presentation showing spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap his buildings are. Let that wash over you for a second. You got 2,000 to 3,000 assessors in one room, and this guy's showing how cheap his buildings are. That's efficient. He's getting all of his property tax bills lowered in one meeting. I'm in the back of the room drinking my coffee. I'm like, this is great. Now, I'm also a former government employee, and I'm also trained as an architect, so I'm having a heart attack because I'm like, how is he getting away with this? Why does no one care? I mean, surely you care. If this guy's going to get away with paying low taxes? So I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he quite honestly shot back, 15, maybe 20 years. We designed the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another one and depreciate it down again. We don't care about the buildings, they're throwaway. We want them to depreciate fast so we can pay lower taxes. That's it. Their commitment to your corporation is 15, maybe 20 years. Is that how we do other commitments? Is that how we get married? Hey, honey, I want to get married. Let's do it for 15 years. Is that how we do that? Is this the kind of investment vehicle you want to have in your corporation? Is that the longevity that you want to have for your kids and your grandkids in your own city? Just realize that's their honest commitment to you all, which is the life cycle of a cat. We at least mourn the passing of a cat, right? I'm a dog person, I'm sorry, but understand this stuff. So why don't people see this? Why aren't we seeing all this stuff that's hiding in plain sight? Well, a lot of it is because we don't have the data presented in a way that we can understand it. So, you're not going to argue with me if I show you an MRI of your brain, right? I can show your creative thought process in green and your brainstem activity in blue. I can show you how your brain works. This isn't mysticism, right? Can we do an economic MRI of your place? This is Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is. Can you all see where downtown Minneapolis is? Boom, right? So let's go back to Asheville for a second. This is my county, 350 square miles. This is a big park right here, so it's non-taxable. The Blue Ridge Parkway comes through town. Green is low value. Purple is high value. That's the Biltmore estate right there. That's America's largest house, the Vanderbilt Mansion. When Mr. Cecil shows up at one of our council meetings, we all genuflect and thank him for his time. He's a very valuable person. His house is worth $100 million. Anybody have a $100 million house in here? No? Not yet? All right, get working on that. You might need some oil. Anyway, actually he was trains. But what's not fair about that is his house is 180,000 square feet and he's sitting on 8,000 acres of land. So he's got the biggest gas tank. So rather than total value, here's value per acre, and here it is in 3D. So we use this as a communication device because we all can see the power of downtown. And I can also see our little sister over here in Black Mountain. We can see its downtown popping up here. This is a village of 12,000 people, and we see its downtown. This is our downtown at 90,000 people. And then generally it spreads out. So in defense of my cousins that live out here in Fairview, they honestly have no idea what we pay in taxes to our county and downtown. How would they? So we have to show that to them. They actually got our state legislature to call us a cesspool of sin. That was super awesome. And we're just like, how about a thank you card? Maybe a box of chocolates. We're okay with giving you money. Just don't stop hating on us. So if we don't show people this data, we can't just tell them that it's there. They have to visibly see it. So surely this is just a North Carolina thing. It doesn't happen this way in California. Well, let's run through some examples. Here's Visalia. You can see it's downtown. This is Fresno. You can see it's downtown relative to everything else. That's Fresno. This is Mountain View, and you can see they're downtown. Google's sitting over here. But you can also see what they're doing along their transit corridor that comes through here along their main trunk highway. So they're building that density along there to harvest value that's very similar to downtown. So you get things like this little building right here that's only 2 stories tall. If you had 1 acre of that building, it would equal the 18-acre strip plaza. So if you have a limited amount of land, how are you going to get that revenue back? What's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck? This little guy here, I love this one. Less than 1/10 of an acre of this thing. It's a coffee shop, an office, and another office up here. It's basically a 3-story mixed-use building. Less than a tenth of an acre would equal the 8-acre target revenue. So think about this. This has been in that portfolio for over 100 years, and it's producing that wealth for you. How is it that you can get this stuff to happen? How do you build wealth over time? This is Sonoma County. You can see all the different cities, Petaluma, Santa Rosa, Healdsburg, and you can see their downtowns all over the place. I loved Roanoke Park. They were so proud of what they were doing from a development standpoint, and look at how flat that is. They never built a place. They never built a downtown like Petaluma or Sonoma, and we can see that in the model. So there's Santa Rosa. The other thing about Santa Rosa, the highway kind of splits the whole city right here, and you can see the divot taken out of the middle of it. This is the railroad district over here, which is actually doing all right, almost what downtown is doing. So they're producing that wealth in their community. Davis, California. This is Riverside, Eastvale, Canyon Lake, and Temecula. You can see their downtown. Eastvale right now is struggling to build their own downtown. They're doing all right from a housing standpoint, but they realize they don't have the diversity that other cities have, that you have your housing stock and then you have your downtown stuff. So they're missing that opportunity. Here's Manchester, New Hampshire. Anybody want to spot downtown? Bozeman. You know, we see this pattern time and time again. You need to have that diversity of product to carry your wealth. So what about retail? We've modeled that as well. One of our favorites is working with Minnesotans. They have incredible data. When we work with California cities, we have to go through a vendor to get that data to map it. But the Minnesotans just kind of have it laying around because that's the way they roll. But they have the Mall of America right there, right? So that's the biggest mall in the country, 100% retail environment. And when my analyst was working on this, I said, Josh, where's downtown? He's like, oh yeah, it's up over here. Who would have thought that downtown was that much more productive than Mall of America? But that's the data. Why aren't we looking at this stuff? I mean, it blew my mind that the folks in Minneapolis weren't even looking at this. They were surprised. And I was like, have you ever looked at it? They're like, well, no, sorry, we didn't. You know, this is the data that we have to look at. This is Redlands, California. We asked them what's that thing right there, that big spike? And they said, it's got to be this building. That's the biggest building in Redlands, California. And we're like, oh, sorry, it's actually this one. I mean, there's the numbers. 6 million an acre, 21 million an acre. Who would have thought that a 2-story building was more productive than an 8-story building? So again, it's understanding the economics of all this stuff and seeing what works and what doesn't, and what kind of wealth you can create. Even this little guy right here, that little building that's been scabbed onto the side, it's creatively titled shoe repair. Like if you had 3 acres of that thing, it would equal a 13-acre Walmart. Are you running the math on this stuff to see what's happening? Like what kind of ringer would you run this guy through if they tried to create that? What zoning process would they have to file in that? Taking one block of downtown, you need 18 acres of that block to equal the 120-acre power center. And that's in retail plus property taxes. So this is total productivity, or another way of looking at it, that much of downtown would equal this much of this. So 18 acres of this would equal the 120 acre that. When you're looking at your land and saying, what's the best use of my land and what's going to give us the best return on our investment, you have to run the economics of this to be able to afford the things that are off the tax rolls, like parks, this building, things like that. You have to run the numbers on this stuff. Now, what's crazy about Redlands is what they threw away. All these buildings are gone. They tore them all out. And look at this like lost civilization of crazy humanoids with incredible technology called horses built this stuff, right? They threw this away. This is the old Casa Loma Hotel. President Taft spoke here. President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt slept here. And now it's a Stater Brothers strip mall at $500,000 of value per acre. Like, what would that have been? Is that wrong? Like, why did you do that? So they have a downtown mall that they built. It's kind of dying. So we went back in time and pulled the Sanborn maps and pulled the old buildings that they used to have, all of these ones here, that they threw away. All the data is here, so we brought them back to life to see what their value was. So here's the mall, what it is today. This is the rest of downtown. By the way, this is called foreshadowing in the industry right there. Here's what they threw away. So they basically threw away, what was that, $15 million of value? So if you're going to give me a $15 million discount or reduction in my tax rate as a developer, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to build you the mall, right? This is what's happening in city after city. It's like, why would you do that? Or conversely, to do the right thing, to make that what we used to do as commonplace for tens of thousands of years, we've set up a tax system that penalizes it. So back to the big buildings. I get this from a lot of people, like, you just want to see Manhattan or whatever. I'm like, all right, let's just start with Charleston. So Charleston's a really cool town. It's old. It's like the Boston of the Southeast. Here's Charleston. Here's its tax model. And when we're presenting this to them, I'm like, look, you can't claim the value of the beach. You didn't make the ocean. So they're going to go ahead and get rid of that. This is what humans made. And you can see the old peninsula or downtown right here. And they have super old buildings that predate our country. So I know when we were born, right? July 4th, 1776. So we just turned the model off. Anything after that, we just erased. And we just grabbed the buildings that are older than that. Things like this. This is the oldest liquor store in the entire country. It's been the oldest operating liquor store in the country, except for 20 years. They called it something different, but they did sell liquor there. It's called the Red Dot. Here's a revolutionary getting his drink on. That's a 1686 that was built. Tremendously difficult technology, right? So here they all are in plan, in the model. Here they are in plan. So 21 acres of buildings that predate our country. In 2015, this is what they paid in county taxes, $600,000, right? They paid city taxes and a business improvement district tax on top of that. But this is what the county got. Out in the county, there's a Walmart, happens to be 21 acres. This is what it paid the same year. Those buildings have survived half a dozen wars, a bunch of fires, hurricanes, an earthquake. They've survived all of that and produced wealth for the community. This is going to be gone in what, 2025? That's going to be gone. Is this the kind of world that we want to create? This is going to become landfill, which is going to be incredibly destructive from an environmental standpoint. Why would you build buildings that are just so temporary and throwaway? Is that what you want in your society? Or better yet, why would we incentivize that in the tax system? So, okay, hey Joe, you just want to make everything dense like Amsterdam or something. No. This is one of the comments that I get frequently. I'll give you an example. We did work in Gwinnett County, Georgia. I don't know if y'all know Gwinnett County, Georgia. It's outside of Atlanta. And I don't know if y'all ever worked in the South, but we're kind of a quirky culture if you haven't noticed that by now. And Gwinnett County, Lawrenceville is the county seat. I'd never heard of Lawrenceville. And when we were doing the analysis, the Chamber of Commerce hired us, and they gave me distinct orders on what I could and couldn't say to the community. Let that wash over you for a second. They told me I was not allowed to say 4 words in Gwinnett County. I couldn't say the word urban. I couldn't say the word city. I couldn't say the word town. And I couldn't say the word municipal. Why? And they're like, honey, look, we're rural people. We're outside the Beltway. We're not part of Atlanta. We're outside that. And so I'm like, well, my company's called Urban 3. Like, what am I going to say? Like, we're 3? Like, what do you want me to do? But I played along. I'm like, fine, whatever. So they're out here, outside. Here's Atlanta. Here's the Beltway. So they're rural out here, right? There are 812,000 people that live in that county. And so I called up my client. I was like, Kelly, you're all at 812,000 people. And she goes, yeah, I know, honey, but we're 460 square miles. We're huge. All right. So I could do math. This is 1,900 people per square mile is their density, right? You take the 812,000 people divided by 460, that's your density, which is less dense than DeKalb. DeKalb has a piece of Atlanta and Decatur in it. But we had all of this other data, so I put it out there for them. And I was presenting to them, and I said, hold on a second. Like, y'all are 600 people per square mile denser than Mecklenburg, North Carolina. What's in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina? Charlotte. I've heard of Charlotte. Never heard of Lawrenceville. This is Davidson, Tennessee. What's in Davidson? You're 600 people denser than them. What's in Davidson, Tennessee? Nashville. Both of these places have a professional football team. There's no such thing as the Gwinnett County Cowboys. This is Austin. You're double the density of them. Raleigh, Asheville, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This is what rural looks like. I don't know what you did there. So whatever you're saying you did, I don't know. It's just kind of mind-blowing to me. I don't get it. So we did their model, and as they were doing it, I was talking with my analyst. I'm like, Josh, could you just turn it on its side for a second? So it looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's the same thing, straight across the whole thing. And the reason why I was kind of freaked out about it is this is what we typically see. And in Orange County, I can see 3 distinct places, right? And I can see their downtowns in each of them, and this is some new urbanism over here. I can see economically what's going on. Now, this city can afford its growth boundary. They have a growth boundary here. They have the most insane amount of greenways I've ever seen. They have also got a $17 million library. They can afford that because they've built wealth in their community. I don't know what y'all did here. These are choices you made. These are biases that you have. And you yield the results of how you talk to each other. So this is the most potent building in your entire county right there that your great-grandparents left you. That is it. This 4-story building. It's 3 stories and it drops down over here to a 4th. Is that really hard to do? These are choices that you all made. So this is the most valuable building in your county. All these places are less dense with more value. What are the numbers and conversations you want to have? What do you want to look at when you make decisions? Or you just want to say things about your rural? I don't get this. So the other thing you're missing is a market. So there's plenty of people that want single-family housing. I get it. But there's a lot of people that don't. They want other choices. Are you providing that for them? So 24% of your marketplace wants something that's either an apartment or an attached townhouse. That's 80,000 people that aren't being met in your community. That's fair housing that you're not meeting. And it's stuff like this. I get it. You don't have the history of Boston. You've never built a townhouse before. But is this hard? Is this evil? Is this going to kill somebody? And worse, check this one out. This one's worth $161 million an acre right there. Is that destitute? You can get value out of this stuff and build wealth and walkability, and it's environmentally sound because you're compacting your city, and this thing doesn't become a landfill in one useful life. This is built in the 1800s. It's produced wealth for generations, centuries now. So just to rub it in, we made an economic heart monitor and put the 3 counties of Gwinnett, Travis, which is Austin, and Davidson, which is Nashville, and we kind of just ran a little heart monitor to show them what they're pulsing out at. And there you go. So we got 192 million here, 476 million here at the less dense Austin, and y'all are flatlining at 8. Good job. And they kept on arguing with me. They're like, but we're not urban. I'm like, I never used that word the whole entire presentation. I'm not calling you urban, I'm calling you dense. This is their horizontal infrastructure, right? They've got the same horizontal infrastructure as this, and they've got none of the vertical to pay for it, right? So I asked them, I'm like, are you guys going broke yet? They're like, oh, yeah, we're broke. Good luck. Okay, other cities are just like, we're fine, Joe, you're scaring us. We're doing just great. We don't need to worry about this stuff. We have plenty of revenue. So we did this project in Lafayette, Louisiana. If anybody follows Strong Towns, we did this project with Chuck from Strong Towns. I highly recommend you get on his blog and follow this guy. He's one of our most creative thinkers in the urban environment right now. And Chuck's super awesome. He's also super Minnesotan. When we're digging into their books, Chuck's an engineer, so we're doing the cost. He's helping us with the cost side. We're doing the revenue. We're going to match it up. If y'all ever hung out with Cajuns are really, really funny people. They have a certain perspective on life that's kind of fun, I appreciate. This is the cover of their budget document from 1994. Do you need to read past the cover to understand what's going on with their government? Their counties are called parishes down there, so this is the Lafayette Parish government in a onesie, about to get hit by a tsunami and eaten by a shark. What do you think the elected officials did when they were given this grave information about the state of affairs in their government? Kick that can down the road, right? Now, the finance officer, to her credit, she's like, hey, yeah, we're still screwed. And the third year, they did this joint city-county government. So here we were 20 years later after they did this merged government, and they're still broke. And I said, what did you do to change your behavior in the last 20 years? Or did you just take the city that was actually doing all right and just sync it with the rest of the county? Here's their model. This is their revenue models. Here's their downtown. This is some new urbanism. They spread out into the swamps. Super expensive to fight Mother Nature. But things like pavement. They have a lot of roads. They have 6 square miles of asphalt. So we had to run the numbers to see who's got what, where do you live, and we're going to send everybody a bill for where they live. And just, you should be paying for what you consume inside your municipality. And we do that like this little clicker right here. You know, they charged me for all that plastic. I get it. Why don't we do this with your city? Why don't you cash flow it the way the city actually operates? As we were talking to the council, one of the counselors said this to me. It's not where you live. It's what you believe. What does that even mean? I was dumbfounded. I'm like, yeah, I believe I look like Brad Pitt. Sooner or later, I got to walk by a mirror and see data, right? I'm not him. Now, what's crazy about them, and this is Kevin Blanchard, the Public Works Director, responded to him by saying this: there's no such thing as an infrastructure fairy. We have $200,000 for our budget to fix roads this year, and that's it. So I get to chip and seal a quarter mile somewhere in this county, and that's all I can afford. That's all the money that I have. I love that he said that. So we photoshopped Kevin in on this one. So what does it really look like? Well, here's what it looks like. Here's the problem. When your budget officers, your finance officers get their budget, they follow a standard called the CAFR standard. In it, roads are listed as assets. Pipes are listed as assets. So if anybody's a counselor or anybody runs for government in here, you will look at your budget. If anybody wants to pull your budget, go for it. You'll see an asset ledger that has a bunch of numbers on it. That's your carrying cost of your city. That should be something that should be on an expense ledger because it's a liability. So in my world, an asset is my computer right here. If I had delivery vehicles, those are assets. Or if I had real estate, if I had a hot dog stand, that's an asset. I can sell you the building, the truck, and my computer. Can you pick your roads up and sell them down to LA? No. Can you sell them to Westlake? No. They're liabilities. And if you take this stuff and realize what kind of liability it is, so with this computer, I have to fix it. I have to replace it. With these buildings, I have to replace an air conditioner that I put on top of it. I have to squirrel away money in a reserve account to be able to own that building. It's not just straight cash flow. So when you do this with cities, this is the liability that they have in their roads. That's what they actually have to pay on the roads. This is the money that they actually put aside. Let me ask you a super complex municipal finance question. When your liability is 18 times your revenue, which one is going to win? This. So they don't have enough money to fix their roads. Now, the crazy thing is most governments, what they do is they're like, hey, we can get bonds cheap. Great. Bonding companies are awesome. You know how many cities go bankrupt? Very few. Y'all are a good bet, because what you'll do is you'll not hire a police officer, you won't fix a park, because if you get a bad bond rating, they know that you're going to feel guilty about it. You'll never be able to get money again. So cities will go out of their way to cut services once they start getting bonds. And the bonding companies have first right of refusal on your money. They actually can come in and skim off the top and take whatever they want. And if you go broke, it's your fault. It's very, very difficult for a city to go bankrupt. You don't see it a lot. You hear about it. You hear about Stockton or Detroit. How often does that happen? Do you know there's 230 cities in Pennsylvania right now that are bankrupt? You didn't hear about that, did you? Because the state steps in and solves the problem. And this is the cash flow that happens in cities because we ask for things and we don't know how to pay for them. So they only have $25 million to pay for that's why you can only afford to do a quarter mile somewhere. So this is the whole city floating in the lake. This is the money coming out of the city. And this is the cost of people's land use choices here. So we sent everybody a bill for where they live. We just figured it out, send you a bill. And then we look at your taxes to see what you're paying, and we net your losses against your gains to see what's in the black and what's in the red. Here's the whole county in 3D. And if you take this and slap it on the floor so everything pops up vertical, this is how it looks. And so you can see what's net negative and what's net positive. If anybody's colorblind, here's another way to look at it. And they told me, like, Joe, look, people really want to live out here. And I said, well, hell yeah, that's what you're paying people to move out there. Can you afford that? So is this all too nerdy for you guys? Are you guys all right with this? I mean, it's insane when we look at cities. It's like, why aren't we having these conversations? They had, in 1950, they had 34,000 people, 5 feet of pipe per person, 2.4 fire hydrants per 1,000. This is their population now, 121,000. This is their feet of pipe per person and their fire hydrants per 1,000. They grew their population 350%. They grew their liability 1,000 and 2,000%. Is that going to work out? City after city is going through this. Were their grandparents, how did they live with so little pipes, you know? And they told me, they're like, Joe, look, we got rich. We got oil money out of the Gulf. So we're like, all right, we'll measure it. Your household income, adjusted for today's dollars, you guys were dirt poor, and you got richer. They're actually more wealthy than we are in Asheville. But that's 160% growth in revenue. It's 1,000 and 2,000% growth in liability. How are we being able to afford this? How is this going to help your community? Is this the best thing? And it's not just an isolated situation. So we did work in, y'all know Lancaster. We did Lancaster, California. You know where it is. Here's their city. This is their tallest building downtown is what, 3 stories? Can you spot it in the model? Boom. You know, what's crazy though is they have 953 miles of road. And I don't know what that means, so we put it on a map. It can go all the way to Portland with their roads. You all have, I think we talked about this today, you all have about 360 miles of road, so you can at least make it out of the state of California, pretty much. But here's when they built all of their roads. From 1910 to 2016 when we did the study. And you see their great-grandparents went on a little road building spree right here, and then everybody went to sleep until World War II, and then they just came out gunslinging, and you can't help but notice what they built in 1953, right? Well, guess what? When that gets built, when I as a developer build those roads and I give them to you, the city, that becomes your liability. Your roads need to be replaced every 50 years or so. So 50 years, you have to rebuild all of this stuff. So when your community is hit with that capital crunch of resurfacing all those roads, what are most communities incented to do? We need money. We're broke. We can't pay for that. So they build more development, do more either annexation or whatever, and you take down more roads, right? This comes back with a second rebuild and brings along with it the new stuff. So we stopped them in 2016 and said, here's your build-rebuild cycle of all of your roads. This is your cash flow model and what it looks like. So you can see that first wave was just kind of stupid. And then because, we're Americans, we all like cars now, this is who we are, we're different. Even though for tens of thousands of years we built walkable cities, this is new now. This is who we are. We're lazy. We went ahead and doubled down on that pain, and now it's getting bigger and bigger without us doing a damn thing. This is what every American city is going through. Don't look at your budget for what you're doing today. Look at your budget for about what's to come due because of your massive growth that you did in the 1970s. That's your next 10 years, is dealing with that. And then the 80s, 10 years after that. So the scale of your infrastructure needs to be replaced. This is what they can afford. We flush their money through the system. Green is what you could afford, red is what you can't. So you can afford 50% of your roads. Now, we're not saying take all the red roads and just let them go to dust, but some roads you should, because you can't afford to keep them all at the level of service that you want. So this is an American paradigm. It's an American problem. This is a habit that we're all going to have to go through. And there's great grandparents that you can learn from. Now, one of the things that we saw in your Ventura County report is that you guys are basically flatlining in population. So go to some place that's already been through this, like South Bend, Indiana. Here's their downtown. Their pipes, this is their population growth right here from 1890 to 2010. Their best year ever was 1963. And then they lost Studebaker and Packard to Detroit. Their population dropped and they flatlined, right? So this is just population and pipes. Here's their pipes on the right, and here they are building their city out with their pipes, and we've got the ticker going. I'll drop a boundary when their population stops in 1963 so you can see the data. So here are you growing a city. It seems reasonable. Here's when the population stops. Do y'all see a problem? If you're not adding more people and you're adding more infrastructure, what's that liability to your kids and your grandkids? It's getting more expense on less people. And this is a habit that cities have. We don't look at what we're building and make value choices on what's the best thing for our community from a financial standpoint. Could that money be spent better in a better place? And they ran a pipe down here to try to lure a Walmart in. The Walmart didn't come, and what did they do? They're like, well, we spent $7 million on a pipe. Let's do some development down here, which was the absolute stupidest thing to do ever. These residents will never be able to cover the cost of that pipe, and you've just competed against yourself and your existing housing stock. So your existing housing stock just craters from a value standpoint, and you pick up more liability. This is crazy, but cities do this. We do this because no one looks at the data. This is their pipe growth over their population growth. Like, were your grandparents camels? They could live with so much less pipe? I mean, what's up with that? They have enough pipe to go from South Bend to my office. It's insane, the infrastructure that we've been building without looking at the totality of that cost, because we're in a habit now. We have a lifestyle that we think we want without understanding what it costs us. I understand it's depressing. I'll give you a way out. Eugene, Oregon, we did their model: revenue, expense, net, top view. If you lift this up, you can see their downtown's doing awesome. If you lift this up like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, this is what it looks like. You can see the subsidy that's spread across the entire model. And it's okay, that's all right. Just be conscious of that subsidy and make sure you can afford it. It comes down to building types. So you have residential, low density, medium density, high density. These are little 4-story guys by the campus. This is mixed use, low density, medium density. This is actually a historic old hotel, and higher density, commercial, low, medium, high. We call this the Brady Bunch slide. Is this 9? But this is just a sample. We did all the different building types, but basically here's how it nets out. The average single family house is subsidized. That's a fact. We don't want to pay taxes. This is who we are as Americans. I mean, our country was formed on a tea revolt because of taxes, right? There's a great colonial barb. Don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fellow behind the tree. This is who we are. So who makes policy? Oh, that would be residents. So we put the burden on the commercial investor in the commercial property because we assume the real estate developers are going to pay more. Well, these are also people that do math and they figure out all the loopholes and we just don't pay attention to them. So just be aware of it. And it's not me that's come up with that number. That's their actual numbers based on their infrastructure. And it actually has been validated for the last 60 years. This is the Nixon administration published this document, The Cost of Sprawl, in 1973. The math is there. We just refuse to accept it. We're in a delusion at this point. So I understand you want a house. Got it. I've got a house. But when you do 80% of your land use is a subsidy, it's not going to be a good recipe for financial prudence, right? So if you go back to the cities, if you see them like a core sample, you should have something of every part of the tree ring, not just one layer of the tree ring that's 80% the width. And this isn't to say you can't have your house. It's just understand like how to pay for that stuff and how to afford your quality of life. So balance it out. I can't eat pizza every single day, but I like pizza. I'll eat salad, I'll exercise, I'll do other things to balance out my diet. So when you look at their model, and as you all go through your comp plan, think about this. Think about other areas where you can help build wealth. Yes, you're lacking in the downtown. Got it, you need that. But there are other areas. So in Eugene, we told them to fill in some more in the downtown, but you notice what's going on over here. This is an indicator of something that should be replicated. So maybe pick 4 or 5 spots to build little neighborhood centers like that one, where you have a restaurant or a bar or a pub to go to or something, a grocery store, something that's got the density that produces that wealth in the neighborhood, but also reduces trips and carbon load as well. So there's all sorts of incentives baked into the system that we're not looking at. And it's a suburban bias that we've built, or actually not even us, that the industry has built into the models that we've accepted without even having a conversation. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is Cheyenne, Wyoming. This is one of my favorite models ever. So there's, when we get your data, you see there's a dirt value, and pull your tax bill, you'll see this. There's a dirt value and there's an improvement value, or your building. We'll go into the computer and turn off the buildings and just look at the dirt. And you'll see out here, this is up here in the upper left, you can see everybody's got the same value. That seems fair. But notice right here where this is blue, which is 15,000, and when you cross the street, it turns to 40,000. So just by crossing the street, it doubles in value. I was presenting at 8 in the morning in Cheyenne, and I was showing this model, and I asked the audience, I said, so how does land double in value when you cross the street? Do y'all know this? And they were totally silent. And the tax assessor was sitting in the front row, and she shoots her hand up in the air, and she just yelled at me, "You don't understand." I'm like, what am I missing? She goes, well, they have more land. The more land that you have, the lower the value. Does that make any sense to you all? I'm like, why? And she started rattling off this standard that they have, and I'm like, well, hold on a second. I've got 3 miles of street around the outside of this property. This fellow over here only has 200 feet. She goes, yeah, we don't count infrastructure as part of the valuation. I said, so you put money in the ground and you don't want it back? She goes, no, that's not part of our standard. So the reason why I was at the assessors conference was to ask them where they got that standard. Now, incidentally, their magazine is called Fair and Equitable, which is super awesome. And to their credit, when I showed them this, I'm like, where did this come from? Where did this standard come from? Is it fair? Is it equitable? And their response was awesome. They're like, it's not. I'm like, do you know where it came from? Did Moses deliver this to you? Like, where'd this come from? And they're like, we don't know. You got to talk to Larry. I'm like, Larry who? They're like, Larry Clark. So I tracked this guy down in the hallway. I'm not making this up. And Larry's like, he thought this joke was funny, by the way. He's like, yeah, it's not fair, it's not equitable. But now that you point that out, it's probably something in the 1700s when we came over from England and no one's really looked at it. And now that you point that out, yeah, we probably need to change it. It'll just take a little while to get through the system. We're sorry. how's the market going to respond? If you're going to give me those subsidies, I'm going to consume them. I'm going to waste your infrastructure. I'm going to take your money out of your pocket. Are you choosing that? Are you, to have a Pep Boys across the street? Is that what you really want in the middle of your downtown? I can use that land for that, and the longer I sit on it in California, the more subsidy I get. Parking. Peoria, Illinois, they told us they had a parking problem. I'm a map nerd, so we measured it. Here's your downtown, here's your water, here's your green space, here's your streets and sidewalks, here's all your surface parking, here's your buildings. Now what's crazy is of those buildings, these are all parking decks. I'm like, doesn't look like you got a parking problem, looks like you got a perception problem. Now what's crazy about this is there's a financial cash flow that happens that we're not running. So when I as a developer build this stuff, and these are actually their numbers for Peoria. The average Peorian, there she is, she's got about 1,200 square feet of buildings dedicated to her, and she's got 3 parking spaces dedicated to her across the whole entire county. That's what's been built. Now when a developer builds that, the tax assessor comes in and goes, well, how much is it worth? And this is the value of the building per square foot. This is the value of the parking per square foot, right? And then I pay taxes on the building. The parking can measure it with the value. Y'all follow me? 2% on top of the building, 2% on top of the parking. Now the road that you all have obligated me is going to cost me $9 a square foot in front of the building and $9 a square foot in front of the parking. Y'all follow me? Yet the parking is paying 27 times less taxes because it's less value. So that's a tax break. That's a subsidy. You're charging me less for wasting your real estate. Every city I go to is, have I gotten you guys like really irritated at this point? Are we doing all right? Like, we need to understand when we ask for these things, there's a cost of this stuff. When you have a big field of parking over here in the middle of your city, there's a cost that you're carrying. Although this is non-taxable land, but across the street, you're paying for it. So when we do these models and we see that it just drops off around the downtown, this isn't a surprise because there's a bunch of parking around the downtown. There's a choker collar holding in the downtown. When you go out to the suburbs, they're so flat in all of our models because they're mostly parking. In fact, we mandate it. We tell you, please waste your land. We're going to require you to build 5 parking spaces per table at a restaurant or something stupid because people complained. So we did the whole model, the whole county this way. This is the entire county. If you take all the buildings in the entire county and just push them together cheek to cheek, that's the amount of land you would need to house, build, work, everything for an entire county's worth of buildings. That's it. That's the only destruction you needed to do on this planet to destroy land. But hey, I'm not really all that environmentally concerned in Peoria. I want to stretch out. We're America. I want land. I want to stretch out. Joe, we're not European. I don't want to be so close to each other. Okay, you got to park it. And then this is the roads that you own. So these are their actual square footages, or the square miles. They actually have more land dedicated to parking than buildings, and this is their liability. This is everything else, berms, buffers, backyards, farms, parks, whatever. These are their numbers. Let me do it on a per square mile basis. The buildings are pulling about $1 billion a square mile. Parking's only pulling 40, and their cost of roads is $250 million a square mile. This is everything else. So they're not getting any money out of this stuff that we all like. We don't charge for your backyard. We're also not charging for parking. If we know that the car is stationary here and the car is moving on this, shouldn't the car moving pick up the cost of the car stationary? At the very least, shouldn't the cost of parking be commensurate to the cost of the road? Seems fair. But instead, because we're not looking at this, we end up going in and pillaging this fund to cover that loss right there. So you're not consciously choosing to build a park, put in a piece of sculpture, take your high school kids and sending them to a summer camp at Stanford or something. You don't have that money to make those choices. So they have enough road to go from Peoria to Vancouver. That's crazy. So this is all spatial analysis. That's all we're doing. This joke only works for people over the age of 35, I figured out. You get it. So back to Eugene for a second. This is their sewer system. So here's a map of their sewer system. And each of these different colors is a different basin. It's its own sewer system, basically. And I asked them, do everybody pay the same per gallon flush in the sewer system? And the engineer said, yeah, everybody pays the same gallon cost. I said, yeah, but these people have 8 different lift stations. That's a lift station right there. These people don't have any. Lift stations are super expensive. They're like a big machine that lifts your sewerage uphill. And if you could imagine that job, it's not a clean job, and it has to be maintained a lot and fixed. They break, they're super expensive. Why are these people getting that subsidy? And the engineer's like, well, I didn't really think about it that way. And there's stuff like this baked in the system all over the place. Here's 2 neighborhoods next to downtown, and you can clearly see this one's denser, right? So the planner was like, this one's denser, it's got bigger infrastructure. And I said to the planner, I'm like, do you know that for a fact? I mean, let's look. So the infrastructure is 1 inch wider, so it's 9.5 inches here and 8.5 inches here. The problem is this neighborhood has double the amount of units that that one has on half the amount of pipe. And when you do the math of that, this one's got 4 times the amount of pipe per person than this one. So digging a ditch 4 times longer is more expensive than digging it 1 inch wider, right? And so this is the tax value difference. You're getting a lot more taxes out of that versus that, about 1.5 times the taxes, or 1.25 times the taxes. And the engineer said, well, we don't care about taxes because we charge a stormwater or a sewage fee. I don't care about taxes. And I turned to the planner and I said, Will, how do you get paid? And he goes, property taxes. And I turned to the engineer, I said, so you don't care about how Will's going to get paid? You don't care about the police department? You don't care about the parks? And the engineer was like, well, I didn't really think about it that way. And secondly, when you stretch people out like that on more infrastructure, it costs more to replace it. So did you all choose to give people that big infrastructure bonus? Did we have a conversation of them getting a $3 million gift for their lifestyle? Because that's what the community is picking up in this. When we don't have the money for the Greenway, the art teacher, or the dancing traffic cop, do you guys have dancing traffic cops yet? When you don't have that money, it's because it's buried into a system of choices that we didn't have the conversation on. And that's all I ask, is that you raise your level of discourse and civic understanding to start talking about this stuff. This isn't complex math. This is just looking at the data under a new lens of spatial relationship. So if we're not measuring it, you can't manage it. If you're not having conversations about stuff that's hiding in plain sight that you can measure, you can't manage this stuff. And there's weird stuff baked into the system. I'm going to close with this last example, and this is about equity. So as a side project in my office, I used to work in South Florida. South Florida is a very vapid place, and once a year they come out with these newspaper articles about all their rich people that pay a lot of taxes. And so this is the Fort Lauderdale newspaper, and they're bragging about like all these mansions that pay. This mansion pays $1 million in taxes. This mansion, actually it's 2 mansions, because you don't want to have one mansion. You want to put your spouse across the street and just let them be over there. They're paying $1.5 million in property taxes. This one's got a golf course, because you need a golf course on the ocean. Why not? But that's not the fair way of looking at it. As you know, I want to see an apples to apples. These are all different sizes, so here's the tax bills that they all pay per acre, and let's rearrange them. So actually the smallest one's paying the most per acre. The double mansion's in the middle. The golf course one is the least contributing. So I don't know if there's any 1%ers in here, but let's move to the rest of us, the 99%, and see what we pay. So let's go from the multi-million-dollar mansions to us schlubs, the multi-dollar mansions. Things like this. Middle income in Delray Beach, West Palm Beach, down to, this is a poor neighborhood, predominantly African American. It's the South. There was a law in place that said that black people couldn't live south of a block away from that until 1973. And this is what you see with institutionalized poverty in the South. This woman's paying $900 in taxes. Let's call it $1,000. But again, not a fair way of looking at it because her house is the size of a parking space. So let's do her per acre. So per acre, you see different numbers. So let's just take this guy in the middle right here, $78,000 of taxes. He's actually more productive than the golf course. That's the facts of numbers. He doesn't have an ocean view. He doesn't have a golf course. He doesn't even have a yard. His jacuzzi is sitting in the parking space right here. And what's even crazier is it's the oldest block in Palm Beach County. He doesn't even have a street. He's got a sidewalk that goes through the block called Mango Promenade. So he doesn't have an infrastructure investment. Let's talk about townhouses. These are all townhouses. This is what they pay in taxes. But per acre, they're crushing it. They're actually more tax productive than the double mansion. That's a fact. This is the data. This is usually where I stop that presentation, but for y'all, let's have a little fun. I grabbed this guy's property. So he's killing it with a market value of $56 million on the ocean. He gets a taxable reduction to $29 million. So you all, when you look at your tax bills, you'll see a taxable reduction. That's a 50% reduction in value, right? Seems fair. Let's grab her house. What's her reduction? Does that seem fair to you? Are we even asking these questions? Do we even look to see, is that equitable that she gets less than 1% of reduction while he's getting 50%? What's crazier is, at $33,000 of taxes, she's actually more tax productive than Mar-a-Lago. Just facts. It's just data. Is this what we want in our community? Are we having a conversation about this stuff? So Thousand Oaks, y'all are $32 billion of value. You're actually more tax productive than all of your professional sports teams in LA. You're about 31.7 Lakers in value. And I can guarantee you that Ms. Bass knows LeBron James' towel bill. I can tell you our cups cost 5 cents a pop in our nightclub. We have to know that data. You have to be conversant about what it costs to maintain a park, a greenway, this wonderful building that you have here. Run the numbers on that stuff and make sure that you can get the money out of your community to pay for this stuff. It's all connected. And make a value choice. So we call it geo-accounting. We're going to put your numbers on a map so you can see it. And you should be doing the same thing. And like your accountant's not going to judge you. Your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. So if you can afford it, great, do it. But don't go out and buy a boat if you're making $20,000 a year. That just doesn't make sense. So put the numbers on a map. Don't make a value choice until you see the data. And just to run through some comparisons real quick. Here's the area. This is the block that we're currently sitting on. Here's the City Hall building. And then I grabbed a part of the Toyota for a second. But this is my downtown by comparison. So basically, you're the size of my downtown in one block, which is kind of crazy. But y'all probably don't know Asheville. So here's Florence, Italy. This is the entire old Renaissance part of Florence. Here's the Duomo. Here's the Uffizi. All of Western civilization changed in this area. You got Da Vinci running around, Michelangelo, right? You could fit all of Renaissance Florence in about 4 blocks of Thousand Oaks. Okay, that's maybe a little too crazy. Let's talk about San Luis Obispo. Is that hard? So let's take this block and drop it on San Luis. And then let's take the Toyota, and I threw the Pep Boys in there because that's one of my favorites, so we'll just add that in. So basically, 3 parcels of land would equal all of downtown San Luis Obispo. And they're like only 40,000 people. They've got a much more robust downtown. I wouldn't say this is a negative thing. This is an incredible opportunity for you guys as you go forward. You have a lot to work with here. Or even Pasadena. Y'all are the same population as Pasadena. Let's grab that and slide it over Pasadena to show you the scale. Now, really what you need to do is put on your X-ray specs and see the reason why Pasadena is different from you all. And it gets down to the bones, the skeleton of how your city operates. It's a grid. And you see what you have to work with from a traffic standpoint. So what's beautiful about the grid is it disperses traffic. So the more that you add to it, the more it spreads it out. When you have everybody going through one intersection, you're going to have traffic congestion. That's a fact. So pay attention to the grid structures and how that operates as you go forward. It's a different animal to do a downtown or to have that urban development, and it takes change. So read Chuck's book, get a copy of it, it's awesome, and do your math. Thanks. I think Matt's coming up here for questions. Oh, you're over here, okay. But just keep it on and he'll get it up there.
I want to point out that there are just as many people here as when you started. So apparently it was riveting here. I was really fascinated by it. Again, I'm Matt Ramey with Ramey Associates. We are the lead on the general plan, and it was really exciting to have Joe here and presenting on this information. It is really new even for a lot of us as planners. And planning conferences aren't as bad as you say they are. Let me tell you that right now. So we have some time for question and answer. I know that was a lot to take in. It was a lot for me to take in. And so we want to start. If people have questions, about the presentation. I will come down, hold the microphone. If you all could say your, your name and briefly ask a question, that'd be great.
Sir, do I get the impression in your presentation that going vertical is good? You stress that because you want a better tax base the higher you go when you build. Is that your thrust?
Yes and no. I mean, so the question is, the higher you go, the better the tax base, and that I'm stressing going high. That's all relative. You don't have to be that tall. You know, townhouses, there's things you can do to thicken up. I'm trained as an urban designer. The real thing that I would advocate for is start by walking. And then you'll notice how much real estate you're wasting when you walk. And you can do a 10-minute walk in my downtown and see lots of different buildings and lots of different economic opportunity, restaurants and all this stuff. Again, my city's 90,000 people. We have 150 restaurants downtown. I have 40 breweries. I have that because we have that urban product. Now, I'll also tell you that we've got buildings I've got one building that's 17 stories tall that was built in 1920, and that's when our whole county was only 50,000 people. So are all our buildings that tall? No, but you can do some buildings that are different sizes. I think when we get into conversations where we set finites and limits, like, no, Joe, nothing more than 40 feet. It's like, where did that come from? Why? It's like, let's have a conversation about that. Can you have a little area where it's 6 stories going to kill you? That old JCPenney's department store that was built in 1920 is 8 stories tall and is producing 100 times more than Walmart. But it's had that ability to keep on producing for 100 years. But in Charleston, there are only 2-story buildings. The tallest building in downtown Charleston is 8 stories. Most of the buildings are under 4. Sure.
In this town, I think a lot of people don't want to go too tall because you destroy the whole atmosphere of our town.
Okay. Well, again, that's a subjective statement. What's the atmosphere? How do you define that? And what's really, is Pep Boys, is that really contributing? Or the Jiffy Lube down the street? Like, what's your character of your city? Because I can tell you right now, that's the character that I see, And so what's the economic model on those individuals sitting on that land, and what's their incentive to make something good happen? Right now, all the incentives are for the bad stuff. And it's you've got to pay for things. And that Jiffy Lube and the Pep Boys really is, I hate to keep on knocking them, but it's a low value investment. And so just if you start running the cash flow and start there, then bring in the value statement, then bring in the design decisions, find the grandfather, the grandmother. Are there parts of downtown Pasadena that are workable for you? Or even San Luis Obispo? It doesn't have to be big places. Brevard, North Carolina, 7,000 people. They've got 4 buildings on their main street that are 3 stories tall. Actually, you know what? Let me show it to you. This is Brevard, North Carolina. And is literally Mayberry. The mayor is called Mayor Jimmy. Mayor Jimmy works in the hardware store on Main Street, right next to City Hall, and his commute is walking across the property line. When we did their model, this is what it looked like. And Mayor Jimmy goes, well, hell, I can spot where downtown is. Got it. Is this going to destroy the character of your community? For some people, they'll say yes. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. You have a room full of people. Is that the majority of the community that would feel that way? That's your choice. But as long as you're running the numbers on it, that's cool. What I usually tell people is I want to be 6 foot tall and have a full head of hair. That would make me happy. I think you should pay for it.
If you have parking that is not required, if you don't require people to provide parking, it seems like you would have people would stop providing parking and then expect people to walk from parking owned by other people to their property. How do you prevent that subsidy from happening?
So the question is, how do you deal with parking if you get rid of parking requirements, right? And how do you keep people from parking on somebody else's property? Well, you really can't. But that property owner can have you towed. And that's what happens in Asheville right now. We got rid of our parking requirements in 1990 as part of revitalizing our city. But the same token, the city went on a proactive parking strategy. And the attitude was, if we're concerned about the cars moving around on the streets, right, that's public, we socialize that. We're all like hard left when it comes to streets. Everybody should pay for them, right? But when it comes to parking, it's your problem. And our city turned that around and said, let's think about this collaboratively, and can we strategically put parking around in the downtown so that those buildings can get rehabbed and used, and the people that move into those buildings, if they choose to have a car, can go buy a parking pass from the city. And so that's how we park in Asheville. And we did a parking deck with the city as a public-private venture, and it's a 20-year bond that we're going to pay off in 8 years. So the city's getting nothing but free money from year 8 to 20. We're building wealth for our community. On top of that, we wrap taxes around it by putting a taxable building around a public parking garage. And that building's paid, it paid $18,000 in taxes in 2008. It's not even finished, and it's paying $300,000 in taxes. So we're growing community's wealth by 2,900% off that. But again, we have an environment that's walkable. To walk from here, I got a coffee down the street. What was the name of the coffee place I went to? Longevity. I would do that walk in Asheville. But because of the physical environment of the street, it made more sense to drive there and get the coffee and come back. So the physical environment gave me all the cues and clues to get in my car rather than do that walk down the street. The physical environment changes your behavior.
All right.
Also, it was easy to park over there.
I believe that currently our tallest building in Thousand Oaks is the 223 building. It's a 3-story building. And I believe that currently that's as high as any of our fire trucks can reach. So I'm just, I'm thinking about the higher you go for the safety factor. And I wonder if in some of these towns where they've built bigger, have you done like a cost, like what it would cost to increase your safety for a different fire truck?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you, so the question is if you build taller, are you going to have more issues and costs with fire trucks? The short answer is it depends. But next week I'm going to Laredo, Texas. Laredo, Texas is a law of the Indies town. It was founded by the Spanish settlers. They've got a bunch of buildings downtown that are 2 and 3 stories tall. And the fire department won't let anybody activate the upper stories because it could be a fire problem. They also have really narrow streets because the Spanish settled it, and they want to drive their really big trucks around. So they're having the opposite problem. They're actually sequestering and destroying value in their city because of the attitude of the fire department that wants to drive 120 miles an hour all over the place. And so the fire chief actually argued with me and said, "You're against life safety." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss the great fire of Laredo from 1910 or something? Was there some huge fire that were protecting all of these buildings that have been around since before the Civil War? Like, were people spontaneously combusting because they were not related and living together or something? I mean, there are laws that if you're not related, you have to sprinkler the house. A multifamily has a sprinkler. Why? And the fire chief will say, well, it's safer. It's like, yeah, it's safer if I never leave my house, too. What kind of level of risk are we going to have in our buildings? Because I can drive into a single-family house, put my car into the house, under a bedroom, with a gas tank in it. That's flammable. Why isn't my house sprinklered? Shouldn't we make all the houses be sprinklered? So when we get into the discussion about life safety and all of that, I mean, I'm not talking build a towering inferno from the 1970s and kind of stress about it, or what happened in England. We should be concerned about life safety. But really at a 4-story building, 5-story building, even 6-story building, you can do that with a ladder truck that's not much more than the vehicles you already own. But lots of times with the current technologies that we build buildings with, mostly concrete and masonry, they're kind of built pretty flame-proof. My brother's a firefighter. So there's ways to have that conversation, and sometimes it's worth the investment.
I see fire departments go the opposite extreme, where they all of a sudden just buy these super ridiculously expensive trucks. Like you need like a diamond-plated chrome bumper on a truck. I don't know why, but they buy these expensive toys. So you should be looking at the budgets of the fire departments as well.
And just for the group's benefit, our tallest building in the city is actually on Amgen's campus. It's about 80 feet, and so it's about a 5 or 6 story building. So we do have fire apparatus that support those buildings.
Well, this building's tall too.
Yes.
Yeah. Getting on the roof of this thing would be hard. We have another, oh,
Hey, Joe, at the end of your presentation, you talked about a grid system in a city, and it showed Pasadena. I'm familiar with the grid system there. Santa Barbara has a grid system, and you pointed out that we don't. And there it is on the slide. You know, we have the 101 freeway, we have Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and we have Hillcrest. So how do I don't see the potential of putting in a grid system at this point, so how do we work around that and come up with something that's a little more pedestrian friendly, maybe not as traffic intense on our east-west roadways?
well, if you don't deal with it, you're gonna have a problem with the main artery, you know, and that's just the reality of the function of flow of traffic. It doesn't matter what you do, if that's the artery of what people go through, you're gonna get stuck with that. And it's hard. It's not gonna be an easy conversation to have, but you all have to bring your A game as a community. That this is gonna be difficult, but it's worth the conversation and it's worth the cost-benefit analysis. What I told the folks in Gwinnett County is that they've built out their whole entire area without thinking long-term about those things. And in their defense, in the 1970s, we weren't thinking that way. It was just like, whatever, the developers will build it and it'll all work out, because that was the attitude of those areas. And those are choices that they made by not addressing this stuff. So now here they are built out, and now they have to figure out how to pay for the system that they've got. So think of it this way. Do you want to put your carpet in your house before you put all your furniture in, or after? Putting your carpet in after all your furniture is there is kind of a difficult task. And it takes a different way to approach it rather than having a big empty room and just laying in your carpet. So your roads are your carpet. And what Pasadena had is a traditional grid system. It was probably more fine than that. They probably made some big blocks and super blocks since then. But there was a pattern that we built cities for tens of thousands of years, and they started as a microgrid system, and we actually required, or developers would add, roads that connected. And we just got into this attitude post-World War II where we got selfish, and we didn't want to connect into the system. And the attitude was, well, I don't want cars driving down my street. It's like, yeah, that's great. But now you're displacing all that traffic into another system, and that system becomes overloaded. So, you know, I refer to cul-de-sacs as publicly funded driveways. Did you all decide that 5 people get to have a free public street in front of them? How is that fair? And cities are actually unplugging them because they're expensive. In Lancaster, we figured out that the cul-de-sacs cost the community $2.5 million a year. So they're having a community conversation about whether or not they can afford that. And cities are going to start unplugging their cul-de-sacs. In Maine, they're already doing it where they just don't plow them. They're just like, whatever, that's yours. Because to send a truck in to plow that and come out is too much of a hassle, and it's too expensive. But as a resident, it's super awesome to not have traffic. Like I said, it'd be super awesome if you guys bought me lobster every day.
Hi there. I had a clarification question based on a couple of the comments from the audience that I perceived your presentation slightly different. In regards to height, I think height is an element of efficiency. And if I'm not mistaken, what I took from your presentation was not build taller, but how can we be more efficient with what we have? Rethink. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? A lot of the slides you showed didn't even show, you know, significantly tall buildings.
Yeah, I mean, Lafayette, Louisiana is a good one. It is efficiency. You hit the nail on the head. And, you know, just, I will acknowledge that I tend to go all over the place with this stuff, and you did get a lot of information. But again, these are humans making choices. And you have one level of human efficiency on the top line and another level of human waste in the second line. And that's fine when they built all of that stuff, because generally speaking, when communities get built, those pipes and fire hydrants and everything, that gets passed on to the consumer. As a developer, I have to pay for that stuff, but I can't just go behind the curtain and make money. So what I do is I divide that cost up into your lot price. And so I pass that all on to you, and you absorb it in your mortgage. But the community has to pick up the second cost. And that's what becomes highly inefficient. Does that make sense? So what we're dealing with, and again, it's just the system and how it's been laid out to us, is that what our grandparents built for us, and for you all in the 70s and 80s, that's when you had your big growth spurt. That stuff's going to start to come due. Actually, let me show you a different example. This is Cary, North Carolina, is going through a very similar problem. And here's Raleigh. And you can see, Raleigh has super tall buildings, but the North Hills doesn't, but it's still popping up. And this area in here around the campus is doing super well, and I think the tallest building is like 6 stories. But Cary, which is out here, is not doing so well. And they've built themselves out, and now they're trying to figure out how to do a downtown after the fact. But one of the crazy things is they already know they're going broke. They've actually got it in their comp plan that they can't just keep on doing annexation, because they've annexed everything they can. And that's how they paid their bills, is they just got new land, which was new revenue. So it's like fighting obesity by buying bigger clothes. It feels really good, right? So here's their land as an area. This is their pre-1960s. Here's their 1960s community. Then in the 1970s, they doubled that. In the 1980s, they doubled all of that. And then in the 1990s, it just got crazy. And then they got smarter in the 2000s and 2010. So this is what they're living with. 31% of their city was done in 10 years. So what their engineering department knows is now they're replacing all the 1960s stuff. These are the bills they're all paying right now. What's going to happen when this hits? When you have to rebuild 31% of your infrastructure. And they didn't add that many more people in that period. They just stretched themselves out and got highly inefficient. Well, they owe all that infrastructure. What's even worse, what's going on with the architecture that was built in the 1990s? It's not like it's award-winning architecture. It's starting to depreciate because it's all chipboard and mass production architecture. So you're getting this double whammy of high expense in devaluing properties. Now, you all have the additional Prop 13 issue in Measure 50, where you have these other restrictions on your growth of value that's going to constrict that too. Your costs don't do the same thing, as much as you'd like them to.
Okay, actually, Joe, can you keep this here for a second? Because I want to bring this to, and we're going to get to some questions, but I want to bring this to the general plan that we're working on now, which is a 20 to 30-year plan. And as the mayor said, that the majority of the city was built starting in the late 60s and in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And that's when we saw a lot of growth in the city. So what we're going to see is that in the life of the plan that we are working on now together, some of these bills are going to be coming due. And so this question of how do we pay those bills is actually going to be of critical importance to the general plan that we're working on. The city is also at this point constrained. There's not a lot of new vacant land to grow into to generate that revenue.
Recycling.
Thank you. When you were talking about Gwinnett County, and then I thought about it too with West Palm Beach, I wanted to know how much of all this is affected by white flight and to another extent black flight, because with Gwinnett County, a lot of the growth there has seen more upwardly mobile African Americans moving from places like Los Angeles, and it's almost reversed the trend. African Americans are moving back to the South. And a county like Gwinnett County and the other ones, Cobb, all of that, there was issues with them not wanting the MARTA system expanded because they didn't want African Americans in their communities. And I feel like that is part of the issue with density. I mean, how much of, density is affected by, people feeling that more density equals, the demographic makeup of their community being changed? Because Gwinnett County, their demographic makeup has changed greatly regardless of density. So I'm wondering how much that plays a part in people not wanting density?
A lot. You know, and I hate to say that, but it's true. You know, in Gwinnett County, the reason why they didn't want me to say the word urban is because that means something to them. That means non-white. Gwinnett County has resisted changes of Atlanta and the colorification of their community. And when I did that presentation, and I'll be honest with you all, when I did that presentation that night, they made me do a stakeholders meeting presentation the night before the public presentation. And these were community stakeholders and leaders, and I was the darkest person in the room that night. And when I presented to them, I said to them that 40% of their population is, or they have a high Pakistani population, Indian from India, Korean, highest Korean population east of the Mississippi, that's 40%, and Hispanic, and then they've got 20% are African Americans. So you're looking at 60% of the population are people of color, and I was looking at a sea of white people in that presentation. And it was like, that's a fact. They were angry with me for doing that presentation, and that's why they kept on asking me about urban. I said, I never used that word. And there's redlining. I don't know if you know about redlining. We've done redlining analysis in places I could, let's see if I've got it here. Do y'all know redlining? Okay. So we don't get a lot of clients that ask us to do this, but when they do, we're just like, okay, we can map this. This is the red line map of Kansas City, Missouri. And you could see the red area. Okay, so in the 40s, the mortgage industry, our federal government, produced these maps to where mortgages would be underwritten. And if you were green, you're good. You can get a mortgage. If you were blue, they'd ask a couple questions. Yellow, they'd kind of maybe probe around a little bit. Red was like, no way. So you can see how much of Kansas City on the east side was red or yellow. They know this, and they want to deal with it. So it's nice when you have a client or a community that's like, we have scars, let's talk about them. In the South, we still have a hard time letting these conversations happen. So we laid the map on top of the race map. The red line that goes north-south is their dividing line in town. They call it Troost Avenue is the name of the street. And sure enough, this is the race map. Green is black, blue is white, and then Hispanic is orange, Asian is red. You see a high correlation between African American and the old red line districts. Okay, so what does that play out economically? So if I'm African American and you're African American and I want to sell my house, yet you can't get a mortgage to buy it because the mortgage maps won't let you do this, right? Because I happen to live in the wrong area. I can't sell my house to you. You can't buy my house because you don't have like wads of cash. So people would work out deals or something, what they could do if they knew somebody, they could do that. But generally speaking, it was really difficult to have real estate transactions in the redlined areas. So what happens is I become older, I can't sell my house to you. My kids move out of town because they don't want to be in Kansas City anymore. They go to Chicago or whatever. And in Atlanta, you saw an explosion of people that just left the South in particular because of racist policies like this. So if you can't sell the house and your kids move away, that means you have to rent that house out. So the house goes into rentership, the kids are all over the place, they don't care about mom and dad's house anymore, and eventually it decays, and the result is vacant land. So we map the vacant land, which is these brown spots, and sure enough, you see a strong correlation between the red neighborhoods and vacant land. So what does this mean? Well, Kansas City is split by two states. This is Kansas City, Missouri. This is Kansas City, Kansas. In Kansas City, Kansas, they're sitting on 3 square miles of vacant lots that have roads and pipes and everything else that they've lost houses on. In Missouri, it's even worse. It's 7 square miles, which is like the land area of Gladstone, Missouri. Like you're paying for that, right? So when we drop the red line map on the 3D model, there is a very strong correlation, still today, 50 years later, of a loss of value in those communities that was started by a racist policy that we all can acknowledge is racist. So this is the legacy effect of this. You have to deal with this. On the Kansas side, it's even worse. Check this out. Like this goes from 1.7 million down to $500,000 in value of the neighborhood. So when you have all those vacant lands, what's the net effect? Let's take this one neighborhood right here, up in the upper part up here. When all those houses are vacant, what's your attitude if you're left in this neighborhood toward your government? You're just like, I'm not paying my taxes. So these are all the tax delinquencies that are of high concentration. In this neighborhood right here, there are 732 vacant lots, pulling an average value of $400 a lot. If you just drop a house on it, the houses that are left, these guys, they're pulling $17,000 of value, which is not significant value. But at $17,000, that's still 40 times more than the vacant lot. So the other thing about the policies is you can actually read about the values. You can read about why they did this. It's amazing the literature that's out there that you can just dig into. But they had the values. So we just said, okay, what if we just put the houses back on these vacant lots? What's the lost taxes that this community put just in this one neighborhood? And let's run the taxes that they basically just threw away. So running the numbers on the 713 lots, it's basically $30 million. The cost in that 1/2 square mile neighborhood was $30 million of wealth that they burned. They just got rid of it because they weren't thinking through their biases. They weren't thinking through what they thought about the city. They weren't thinking at a human level in this case. You know, it's just, it's just the tax policies. Now, here's where it gets perverted. To go and build a house in this neighborhood, what's the bank going to say? No way, right? That's not racist, Joe. That's just the market. If you build your house is going to cost you $130 a square foot, that's going to be about a $200,000 house. The house is only worth $17,000. You can't get a mortgage. That's not racist, right? I would argue that it is. So we have to have an adult conversation about that. And what I told them was like, look, create a separate mortgage pool out of your general fund and just create a revolving fund to get 18 houses in this neighborhood. If you get 18 houses built in this neighborhood, that's a really small move. But you're going to at least stop the bleeding of your taxes. Work with folks that are in this neighborhood who want to live in the neighborhood or maybe know how to build a house. Grow your local economy. But you have to stop behaving this way. And this is a simple thing. But there's, the complexity of all this stuff, there is a lot of difficult conversations that need to happen. But we have to go at it without blame and just be rational about what's the solution on this.
Okay. See, we've a few, how many, can I see a show of hands for folks who still have questions? For anyone else up here, I've been down low. I want to make sure. Okay, I'm gonna go up here, and then come on back down.
I'm here all night.
Could you elaborate more on that shoe store, or what it was called a shoe store? What was going on with that corner that brought so much value?
It's basically, let's get back to it. It's basically a function of density. It takes up 100% of its lot, and a brick or a stick is worth something. So it has value, it has density, therefore it has high potency. In the case of the Walmart over here, it's not designed well from the first standpoint. The building is designed to be about $50 a square foot. Walmart also has a team of people that will come in and litigate you as an assessor. So the assessors are going to be more reticent to putting the value up. If you just pulled the tax value of that building, it wouldn't be all that significant. It wouldn't look that out of the ordinary. But when you put it in a per acre basis, you really see the potency of it. It also doesn't have a surface parking lot, which is the other subsidy that makes the Walmart not worth so much. So it's really just, it's a matter of efficient density on a site. It's not even tall, But this is how we used to build cities back in the day. Let's take a shot of Main Street here. This building on the upper left right there, when that was built, anything down here in Mountain View on the lower right, how thick was their zoning code when they built that? What kind of planning review process did they have? How many committees did they go through to get, Matt, you're working in Mountain View. It's like, could you imagine them just going out and just building that in a field? No. So we create these processes without having an honest conversation about design. Design is the problem. We want well-designed, walkable places, and we know what that looks like. But our code process and zoning process and whatever doesn't really acknowledge that. Or we let something, I mean, y'all have CEQA, which is insane, that you let these processes get hijacked without building place. And that's a cost. As a developer, if you send me through a CEQA process, it doesn't make my project any cheaper. So it rises the cost for everybody in the community.
Okay, next question.
You had a lot of slides with values on them, and I was just curious where your values were coming from. Were they from tax roll assessed values? And then consistently, and then also the other question I have is, obviously California has Prop 13,
Yeah.
which impacts your reassessments on business properties. Can you discuss that a little bit versus other states and how that potentially impacts rehabbing buildings?
So Prop 13, yes, first of all of these numbers come straight out of the assessment files. When we run these models, we want it to actually look like how the taxes actually function. So we'll do all sorts of monkeying around to make it apples to apples. And there's a lot of crazy stuff inside the tax system that we have to get to. And every state has different tax systems. Now, I'll say this. So here in California, you're lucky enough that you got your property 20, 30 years ago, and you're riding a super low value, right? Isn't that awesome? Now, I come in and buy the house from you, and I get hit in the back of the head with this massive tax bill paying off your subsidy that you got. That's the way that the system works. All of a sudden, I'm at like $800,000, and your house was valued at $80,000. Well, in Oregon, there's no reassessment. So I get to enjoy your tax break. Like, how crazy is that? And like, people in Oregon just don't even, that's the way it is. It's like, why would you do something like that? At least try to like re-up it every once in a while. And they don't have any retail taxes. It's kind of mind-blowing that Oregon stays in business. But what they do is they harvest you all. They harvest all the Californians that move up there and make new housing. That's how they grow their money. But every state's got a little a tweak to it. Michigan has a very similar, it's called Measure 50, very similar to Prop 13. You all are starting to adjust the retail, the commercial stuff? No? Still hasn't? There's going to be a ballot measure? You know, our real estate development company owns a bunch of properties. All the properties are owned by LLCs, and we do that so that we can't get sued. Any savvy real estate investor does that because of what happens in an urban environment. You have trips and falls and all this stuff, and we live in a litigious society. So I can't trust the world to not come after me. So we set up an LLC for the JCPenney's building. Now in California, what I can do is sell you that LLC. There's no reassessment. But you know, let's think about this. Housing has also been given this big thing too. So I don't understand why you're just having the conversations on the downtown stuff and not having it at the residential level. How is that fair? When the majority of your land use is this low stuff, why wouldn't you raise that or make it equal? You know, and that's the thing, is like, nobody wants to get rid of their little gift, but they're not adding it up to see what society is being cost by that. And I think that's maybe the number to do, is just see, like, what are you all losing? And would it really raise your taxes? And the scary thing is, when we think about the reassessment, we think about what happens when you sell to me, the new guy. And maybe it doesn't need to be that big. Maybe if everybody just bumped a little bit and was reasonable, and you function more like, I don't know, North Carolina. You know, we just have a straight tax system. We all pay the same. It's easy. There's no games.
Okay.
I hate to recommend North Carolina to anybody, but in this case it works. Canada's another one. Canada does some amazing stuff with their tax system. And it's amazing how illiterate we are with this stuff. Like, I didn't learn anything about Canada when I went through grad school. But they're doing amazing stuff up there, very prudent.
So as I'm walking over to this next question, if the city is constrained on land and there's new development coming in, that land is being recycled, does the city get an increase in taxes with that new development that's coming in?
Yes. In the case of, actually this is probably a good one to keep here. This Purple Mountain that's right here, this is I think this is a 6-story building on the transit corridor. These little guys over here are 4-story buildings. So you don't have to be tall to be potent, but it's also, you can see the jump that you get in these new buildings versus the older stuff that's around it or the older stuff on the corridor. In this corridor right here, see how it's the low yellow stuff right there? That's very similar to what your main strip looks like, your Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And again, it's all just, these are all just the way that we developed communities, but there's also an incentive for me to just sit on that land because of your property taxation system. Sir?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question. A city like Thousand Oaks, between our single-family neighborhoods, our open space, and our parks, we're probably 90% plus build out.
Matt's got that number, yeah.
Does he?
Yeah.
And so looking at us in the context of the general plan for the next 20 years, for that, less than 10% that's left to be redeveloped or repurposed or developed that's open, what would you recommend as a healthy balance for a city like Thousand Oaks?
Well, one is it's I'm not going to just bark out a suggestion. And I end with you need to do the math for a reason. If you could think of a 2-drink minimum, if you will. What's the basic level of FAR or density or whatever that you need to have to be equal or even with your investment as a community? Can you run the numbers on what your pipe costs, your water costs, as well as the reserve account that you need to build to be able to replace all that stuff, and then measure it against the taxes that people pay? It's a really simple concept. There was a gentleman, his name is Henry George. He professed this terminology called land value taxation. Do y'all know land value taxation? We got a couple in here. So Henry George was a tax economist in the 1800s, and he came up with that concept of why should you tax on how the land's used? Why don't you tax on how we've invested in it? And why does the building matter, right? So if I build a granite building, why are you taxing me more? Is it because am I consuming more of society? No. So there's a perverse incentive to build crappy architecture, and I get to consume all of your infrastructure if I put a big surface parking lot or do nothing. And so think about the East Coast in the 1800s, where you have all these people coming over from Europe, and they're just clamoring into these cities. And just because you stepped off the Mayflower in Boston, why should your family be allowed to waste community resources and just sit on land? So let's just change the tax system and just do a land tax across the whole thing and just call it a day. There was a movement in the United States called Georgism that spread like wildfire across the country. Elizabeth Maggie Phillips is a Georgist. She also has awesome eyebrows. And she realized adults are too set in their ways. It doesn't matter what I say, you're not going to hear me because the way things are is the way things are. Life is too difficult. I've got to pick up my dry cleaning. Kids have open minds. I'm going to work with the kids. So she invented a board game to teach us all land value taxation. Anybody recognize it? How do you win at Monopoly? Land assembly, location, put a building on it. She taught us the economics of efficient city growth. She did this because she wanted us to get to the idea of how does cities run at a successful level. If you want to take this to the next level, if anybody wants to play a nerdy computer game, SimCity is a perfect example of this. So we have to think about the economics of all this. And I would start with the 2-drink minimum and then consciously decide, okay, here are all the folks that are going to be getting the discount. Let's talk about this. Are we all cool with this? And then let's make sure that we can get our money some way. But you're also going to hear from those people that are going to be paying more in the system. And that's the conversation that you need to have. Is that fair? Is it equitable? But you can't run the system that you currently have because you're leaking money all over the place the way that you currently are run.
Okay. Can you do one quick question? Sure. Okay. And then,
so going back to the Pasadena versus Thousand Oaks, the grid versus the non-grid, as the city is going through and doing our assessment of potential growth and everything else, would it really behoove the city to look at different opportunities to start really trying to establish more of that grid structure, either going through identifying potential areas where roads can connect through, or even connecting existing roads, instead of having two cul-de-sacs that don't go through, just doing all of that so that we can accommodate this more efficient use of the land.
Yeah, you're going to have to. And, it's going to be difficult. The question is how do you build the grid? Are you going to have conversations that are difficult? And yes, you're going to have to go talk with those disparate property owners and talk about joint development agreements, and realize that these are people that are foregoing some of their land. So they're going to want to be made whole too, because that's land they could develop on. So maybe that's the conversation, that there's a trade-off somewhere. It's like, okay, we might lose a buffer. God forbid. What's the trade-off? We lose, I mean, that's the thing. It's going to be a hard conversation. We lose a couple trees, what do we gain? Are we gaining something that's going to be a broader, longer community benefit? Incidentally, from an environmental standpoint, everything that I've shown you today comes from a book called Design with Nature, written by Ian McHarg in 1969. And he was the first keynote speaker at the first Earth Week. It used to be called Earth Week. We used to actually do a week for the Earth. He spoke in Philadelphia. Allen Ginsberg was his warm-up act. And Ian McHarg is awesome. And in Design with Nature, he talked about looking at the world through a series of layers and honoring the Earth. And my favorite quote of his is, "We have built but one explicit model of the world. It is built upon economics. Money is our measure." And what he was trying to do is get us to put a price tag on nature. And there's a great video, if anybody wants it, I'll send it to you all. And the video is called Multiply and Subdue, which is actually a reference to the Bible. In the Bible, it says, multiply and subdue the earth. And he thought that was so offensive that he titled his movie to put a smackdown on the Bible or something. But anyway, he's a quirky dude. But in the movie, he talks about our water systems. And he's pitching Minneapolis. He's like, this is a map of your wetland. Mother Nature has given this to you for free. Do you know how expensive it is to build a water system? To build a system that will clean your water. And so he's trying to teach us to not follow the earth. And ironically, we kept on following it up. People that want to be out in nature, I'm like, that's great, you're killing it. I'd rather sacrifice and compact, and I'll go visit nature when I want to get to it. So in Asheville, we have all these forests around my city that take that out of our marketplace, but now I have a green lung around my city. It's also our water supply. So these are trade-offs. And I think there's going to be a certain part of your city that needs to densify and grow up to compensate for what you've done here. And it's like this transportation system is going to befoul you and your kids if you don't deal with this. You can't work with these super blocks the way that they are. It's just not feasible at a long-range transportation standpoint, and it's not going to get any better. Sites will redevelop. The Toyota dealership won't be here forever, particularly if you have autonomous vehicles and all sorts of other things. That's going to affect your retail sales too. So you have to start thinking long-term, and that's why go to your grandparents, go to your great-grandmother. Understand these cities that have been around for centuries and learn from them, because there's incredible lessons there about how to live compactly in a more green way, also more financially beneficial.
Okay, so we have to wrap up. I want to first thank Joe for coming out this evening. It really gives us food for thought. I know that there's a lot of really complex information, but it really gives us food for thought for the general plan, which we're doing now, and we need to think 20 and 30 years out. So if folks are not familiar with the general plan, the process is going on. We have a series of general plan advisory committee meetings coming up on February 6th and March 5th. It's on the general plan website and on the city's website. We're going to have pop-up workshops throughout the spring, and then another workshop in late spring. So keep your eyes open for that. And we're going to take these ideas and this information, this data, and incorporate that into the process. And we really hope that you all will join us in the process of thinking about the future of the city. So with that, thanks again to Joe, and good night, everybody.